I found out my husband was leaving me for my best friend on a Tuesday afternoon, standing in my own kitchen, holding a grocery bag full of ingredients for the dinner I was making to celebrate our 12th wedding anniversary. I want you to remember that detail because it matters. 12 years. A dinner I planned for weeks. A man I trusted with everything I had. And a woman I called my sister even though we didn't share blood. My name is Rachel. I was 38 years old when my whole life folded in on itself in the space of about 4 minutes. And I'm going to tell you exactly how it happened and exactly what happened 6 months later, because the ending is the part you're going to want to hear. It started with silence, not shouting, not slammed doors, just David standing in the doorway of our kitchen with his phone still in his hand, like he'd been caught reading something he shouldn't have, except it was the opposite. He wanted me to see it. He'd been building up to this moment for weeks, maybe months, and he'd finally run out of patience for pretending. "I need to talk to you," he said. I remember laughing, actually laughing, because I thought maybe he'd forgotten to pick up the wine for dinner, or maybe work was stressing him out again. I had no idea that the next sentence out of his mouth was going to end my marriage. "I'm in love with someone else," he said. "I have been for a while now. I think you already know who." I didn't know. That's the thing people don't understand about betrayal. You don't see it coming because you've built your entire life around trusting the people closest to you. And the moment that trust breaks, it doesn't just break your heart. It breaks your sense of reality. I stood there with a bag of asparagus in my hand and asked him who. He didn't answer right away. He didn't have to, because right then my phone buzzed on the counter, and it was a text from Melissa, my best friend of 19 years, the woman who had been at my wedding, who had held my hand in the hospital when my mother died, who I had told every secret I'd ever had. The text said, "Did you tell her yet? We need to talk about how we're going to explain this to people." We. I looked up at David, and I watched something in his face confirm what I already knew before he said her name. Melissa. My Melissa. The woman who had sat across from me at brunch 2 weeks earlier and told me she thought my marriage looked so solid. The woman who had hugged me at my birthday party a month before that and whispered in my ear that she loved me. I want to tell you that I screamed. I want to tell you I threw the asparagus at his head, because honestly, looking back, that would have been a reasonable response. But I didn't do any of that. I just stood there in silence, and I asked him one question. "How long?" 14 months, he said, like he was relieved to finally say it out loud. 14 months. That meant it had been going on since before my father's funeral. It meant Melissa had held my hand at that funeral while she was sleeping with my husband. It meant every dinner, every holiday, every phone call where she'd asked how David and I were doing, she already knew the answer because she was the answer. I'm not going to spend too much time on the weeks that followed, because if you've ever been through something like this, you already know what those weeks feel like. The nights where you can't eat, the mornings where you forget for half a second and then remember all over again like the floor just dropped out from under you. The friends who suddenly stop calling because they don't know what to say. The family members who ask, "What did you do to push him away?" As if betrayal is something you invite into your house like a stray cat. David moved out within 2 weeks. He didn't fight for the marriage. He didn't ask for counseling. He'd already made his decision. And honestly, some small, cold part of me was grateful for that, because at least he didn't waste more of my time pretending there was something worth saving. What hurt more than losing my husband, if I'm being completely honest with you, was losing Melissa. Losing a marriage in some strange way felt almost expected. Marriages end. People fall out of love. People make mistakes. People grow apart. But losing a best friend to the same betrayal felt like losing a limb I didn't know I was still using. 19 years of birthdays, breakups, promotions, miscarriages, every ugly and beautiful thing two women can go through together, and she traded all of it for a man. For the first month, I didn't leave my house except for work. I have 2 kids, Emma, who was 14 at the time, and Josh, who was 11, and they were the only reason I got out of bed most mornings. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor one night after they'd gone to sleep, just staring at my phone, wondering how two people I loved that much could look me in the eye for over a year while destroying my life behind my back. But here's the thing about hitting the absolute bottom of something. Once you're there, once you've cried every tear you think you have, there's nowhere left to go but up. And slowly, without even realizing it was happening, I started climbing. The first thing I did, about 6 weeks in, was get a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, a good one. A woman named Patricia who had a reputation for being ruthless in divorce proceedings, and I mean that as the highest compliment. I told her I didn't want revenge. I just wanted what was fair, and she looked at me and said something I've never forgotten. She said, "Fair, in a case like this, usually looks a lot like revenge to the person who did the betraying." David had assumed, because I was quiet and non-confrontational during our marriage, that I would just roll over in the divorce. He assumed wrong. Patricia went through every asset, every account, every property we owned together, and made sure I got what I was entitled to, which, because David was the one who'd broken the marriage, and because I'd been the one managing our finances behind the scenes for years while he focused on his career, turned out to be considerably more than he expected. He tried to fight it. He tried to claim I was being vindictive. Patricia calmly reminded the mediator that vindictive would have been telling every person at his company, every member of his family, and every one of our mutual friends exactly why our marriage ended in detail, and that instead I had simply asked for what the law said I was owed. David backed down fast after that. The second thing I did was something a little more selfish, and I'm not going to apologize for it. I went back to school. Years earlier, before I got married, before kids, I had been 2 classes away from finishing a degree in interior design, something I'd given up because David's career had always come first in our household. Always. I enrolled in an accelerated program, and for the first time in over a decade, I had something that belonged entirely to me. The third thing I did was harder than the first 2 combined. I let myself grieve Melissa properly, instead of just being angry at her. I let myself remember the good years, the real friendship that had existed before all of this, because pretending none of it had ever been real wasn't healing. It was just another kind of denial. And once I let myself actually grieve it, instead of just being furious about it, something shifted. The anger didn't disappear, but it stopped being the only thing I felt. By month 4, something had changed in me that people around me started to notice. My sister told me I looked different, lighter somehow, like I'd put down something heavy I'd been carrying for years, not just since the divorce, but for longer than that. My coworker said I seemed more confident. I'd lost some weight, not because I was starving myself, but because stress does that, and also because I'd started running in the mornings before the kids woke up, just to clear my head, and somewhere along the way, it became something I genuinely enjoyed instead of something I was forcing myself to do. I started seeing a therapist, which I probably should have done from week 1, but better late than never. She helped me understand something important, which was that the version of my life I'd built with David hadn't actually made me as happy as I'd convinced myself it had. I had shrunk myself down for years to fit into the shape of a marriage that required me to be smaller than I actually was. And once that marriage ended, I had all this space to finally become the size I was supposed to be all along. Meanwhile, from what I heard through the small network of mutual friends who hadn't completely disappeared, David and Melissa's grand romance was not exactly thriving. You see, there's something people don't tell you about relationships built on betrayal. The excitement, the secrecy, the thrill of doing something forbidden, that's not actually love. That's adrenaline. And once the adrenaline wears off, once you're just 2 regular people living regular lives together, doing dishes and paying bills and dealing with each other's bad moods, you find out pretty quickly whether there was ever anything real underneath all that excitement. Apparently, there wasn't much. David moved into Melissa's apartment almost immediately after leaving me, which in hindsight I think was actually a mistake on his part because Melissa's apartment was small, and David was used to the house I had spent years making into a home, a house he barely lifted a finger to help create, but had certainly enjoyed living in. Within 2 months, according to a friend of a friend, they were already arguing constantly about money, about space, about the fact that David, apparently, still expected to be taken care of the way I had taken care of him for over a decade, and Melissa, who worked long hours at her own job, had neither the time nor the interest in becoming his live-in housekeeper. There was also, I'm told, a significant amount of guilt that started creeping in for both of them, though I imagine it manifested differently. David, from what I understand, started drinking more. Melissa started pulling away from him emotionally, maybe because the reality of what they'd done, what they'd taken from someone who trusted them completely, was harder to live with than either of them had anticipated when it was still just a secret they were keeping. By month 5, I heard they'd had a massive fight in front of neighbors, loud enough that someone actually called the building's front desk about the noise. The affair that had once felt like some grand, forbidden love story was crumbling under the weight of its own foundation, which, as it turns out, had never actually been solid to begin with. You can't build something real on top of something you destroyed to get there. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't tracking this information obsessively. I wasn't checking up on them or asking mutual friends for updates. Life had simply moved on for me in a way that made their drama feel distant, like something happening to characters in a show I used to watch, but had stopped following closely. Occasionally someone would mention something, and I'd listen with a strange, detached kind of interest, the way you might listen to gossip about people you used to know in high school. By the time month 6 rolled around, I genuinely wasn't thinking about either of them very much at all. My design program was going well. I'd landed an internship with a small but respected firm downtown. Emma and Josh had adjusted better than I'd expected. Kids are more resilient than we give them credit for, especially once they see their mother handling things with strength instead of falling apart. I started seeing someone, nothing serious yet, just dinner a few times with a kind, quiet man named Thomas, who worked as an architect and made me laugh in a way I hadn't laughed in years. I felt, for the first time in longer than I could remember, like myself again. Maybe even a better version of myself than I'd been before any of this happened. And then, on a rainy Saturday evening in early spring, exactly 6 months and 1 week after David told me he was in love with someone else in my own kitchen, there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. The kids were at their father's for the weekend, which was part of our custody arrangement, and I was curled up on the couch with a glass of wine and a stack of fabric samples for a project, feeling more relaxed than I had in months. The knock came again, more insistent this time, and I remember feeling a small flicker of irritation as I got up to answer it, assuming it was a delivery or a neighbor. It was David, and standing slightly behind him, half hidden under the narrow overhang of my porch roof, soaked from the rain because neither of them had thought to bring an umbrella, was Melissa. I stood in the doorway and just looked at them for a long moment, and I have to tell you, the strangest thing happened. I felt nothing like what I expected to feel. No rage, no tears, just a kind of quiet, almost clinical curiosity, the way you'd look at a car accident you weren't personally involved in. David looked terrible. He'd lost weight, and not in the healthy way. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his clothes, which used to be pressed and expensive, looked wrinkled and slightly too big on him, like he'd stopped caring about the details of his own life. Melissa looked worse, honestly. Her mascara was running from the rain, or maybe from crying, or both, and she wouldn't meet my eyes at all. "Rachel," David said, his voice cracking slightly, "can we talk? Please, we need to talk to you." I didn't say anything at first. I just leaned against the door frame and waited, because I wanted to hear whatever they had driven over here on a rainy Saturday night without calling first to say. "I made a mistake," David said. "We made a mistake." It's been a disaster, Rachel. It's been 6 months of complete disaster, and I've had a lot of time to think about everything. About us, about what we had, and I know I destroyed something that took years to build. But I'm asking you, I'm begging you, to give me another chance. Give us another chance to fix this. I actually laughed, not a cruel laugh, more of a genuine surprise laugh, because the audacity of it, the sheer audacity was almost impressive. Us, I repeated. You mean you and me, or you and her, because I noticed she's still standing next to you. That's when Melissa finally spoke, her voice small and shaking. Rachel, I know I don't deserve to even be standing here. I know what I did to you, what I took from you, and I have thought about it every single day for 6 months. I miss you. I miss our friendship, and things with David haven't been what either of us thought they would be. And I think we both made a terrible mistake, and we're hoping there's some way to undo some of the damage. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I certainly did. They weren't just asking me to take David back. They were asking me, in some twisted, almost unbelievable way, to somehow restore the entire fractured triangle of our relationship, to let David back into my bed and Melissa back into my life, as though the last 6 months of devastation could just be smoothed over with a heartfelt apology delivered on my doorstep in the rain. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, I said, and I could hear how calm my own voice sounded, which surprised even me. You left me, David, for her. After 14 months of lying to my face while I mourned my father, while I planned our anniversary dinner, while I trusted both of you with every part of my life. And now, 6 months later, because your little romance turned out to be built on absolutely nothing real, you've decided you'd like to come back. Both of you. Like I'm some kind of home base you can return to whenever your other plans fall apart. It's not like that, David said, though his voice lacked conviction. It's exactly like that, I said. And here's what I need you both to understand. I'm not the same woman who was standing in that kitchen 6 months ago. That woman doesn't exist anymore. You didn't just break my heart. You broke something in me that needed to be broken, apparently, because on the other side of it, I built a better life than the one you took from me. I'm finishing my degree. I have an internship I love. My kids are thriving. I'm seeing someone new, someone who has never once made me feel like I needed to shrink myself down to be loved. And the two of you are standing on my porch in the rain because whatever you built together turned out to be exactly as hollow as the way you built it. Melissa started crying harder at that point, and David reached for my arm, which I stepped back from immediately. Rachel, please, Babaye, he said. I know I don't deserve it, but the kids don't, I said, and for the first time my voice had an edge to it. Don't you dare bring my children into this conversation as some kind of leverage. My children have a father who left their mother for her best friend, and they've watched me handle that with more grace and strength than either of you have shown in the entire time I've known you. Don't use them to try to guilt me into fixing the mess you made. There was a long silence after that, just the sound of rain hitting the porch roof, and I watched something shift in both of their faces. A slow, dawning realization that whatever they'd hoped would happen when they drove over here, it wasn't going to happen. They weren't going to be forgiven. They weren't going to be let back in. The door, both literally and figuratively, was not going to open for them. I want you to hear this clearly because I'm only going to say it once, I told them. I forgive myself for trusting you both because that trust was earned over years, and it wasn't unreasonable to give it. But I do not forgive what you did, and more importantly, I don't need to, in order to move forward with my life, which I have already done, without either of you. You didn't break me. You freed me. And honestly, watching you stand here tonight, soaked and desperate, and asking me to fix what you destroyed, I think you finally figured out something I already knew 6 months ago. What you had wasn't love. It was just wreckage, dressed up as something exciting because it was forbidden. David opened his mouth to say something else, but I didn't let him. Go home, I said, wherever that is for either of you these days. This door is closed. It was closed the moment you decided 14 months of lying to me was worth it. Don't come back here again. And then I closed the door. Gently, not slammed, because I didn't need the dramatic gesture to feel powerful in that moment. I already felt powerful. I stood in my hallway for a moment, listening to the murmur of their voices outside, low and indistinct through the door, and then I heard footsteps retreating, a car door, an engine starting, and finally, silence. I walked back to my couch, picked my wine glass back up, and sat back down among my fabric samples. And I want to tell you that my hands were shaking, because that would make for a better story. But the truth is, they weren't. I felt calm. I felt, for the first time since that Tuesday afternoon in my kitchen 6 months earlier, completely and entirely like myself. I found out later, through the same network of mutual friends, that David and Melissa's relationship didn't survive much longer after that night. Whatever hope they had of some kind of reconciliation with me, some restoration of the comfortable life they'd apparently taken for granted, dissolved along with the relationship itself within a couple more months. I heard David move to a different city for a fresh start. I heard Melissa spiraled for a while before eventually rebuilding some version of her own life, though our friendship, obviously, was never something either of us tried to resurrect. As for me, my life kept moving forward, the way it had been moving since around month 2 of the divorce, when I finally stopped waiting for someone else to fix what had been broken and started fixing it myself. I finished my design degree with honors. My internship turned into a full-time position, and 2 years later, I opened my own small design firm, something I never would have had the courage or the time to do if my marriage had stayed intact. Thomas and I got married 18 months after that rainy night on my porch, in a small ceremony with just our closest friends and our kids, who by then had genuinely come to love him. I think about that night on the porch sometimes, not with anger, but almost with a kind of distant gratitude, because it was the moment I truly understood how far I had come. 6 months earlier, I had been a woman standing in her kitchen, blindsided and broken, wondering how she was going to survive the wreckage of her marriage and her closest friendship falling apart at the same time. And 6 months later, I was a woman standing in her doorway, calm and clear-eyed, closing a door on people who had once meant everything to me, without a single ounce of hesitation. Betrayal, I've learned, has a strange way of showing you exactly who you are underneath all the compromises you've made to keep other people comfortable. It strips away everything you thought you needed and forces you to discover what you're actually capable of when you have no other choice but to rebuild. David and Melissa thought they were leaving me broken. What they actually did was give me the space to become someone stronger than I ever would have allowed myself to be, while I was busy shrinking myself down to fit into a life that was never really built to hold the whole of who I was. They came back begging, 6 months later, standing in the rain on my porch, hoping I'd still be the same woman who used to make herself smaller for other people's comfort. But that woman was gone. And honestly, looking back now, years later from the life I've built since then, I wouldn't want her back for anything in the world. If there's one thing I want anyone listening to this to take away, it's this. The people who betray you are usually hoping, somewhere in the back of their minds, that you'll still be there when their choices fall apart, that you'll be the safety net they can fall back into once the excitement wears off and the consequences catch up to them. Don't be that safety net. Let them fall. Because the version of yourself that rises up while they're falling is going to be stronger, freer, and infinitely more powerful than the version of yourself they left behind.